Hey everyone. So, if I was to praise this chapter for one thing right out of the gate, it's how it meticulously fills in the gaps and smaller details of the world's history. As one of the first major things we learn in this chapter is that one of the major reason Elbath never officially joined hands with the world government as a member nation is because whether intentionally or not, they kept putting Harald in morally compromising positions by dealing in their usual bullshit of enslaving unaffiliated countries that Harald also affiliated himself with. And it is interesting to seeing these two opposing worldviews clashing where the government sees no value in these countries, but Harald finds that value and knows how to capitalize on it while still treating the people themselves like equals. And yet whereas the government, they're basically just all about the only way to capitalize on the value of these countries is for them to, in order to join the much bigger tent of the wider world. And yet the funniest part of this is, despite how many times Harald came to blows with the government, he was still committed to having good relations with them, to convince them of its political value, and yet still so unaware of what was actually going on. Even though, even though he saw John Giant becoming a Marine is a good thing, I wonder how much he would have actually approved of that if he knew Caramel's true colors at the time, and the fact that John Giant was kind of, I don't want to say forced into that role, but he was definitely coerced, I think, in some ways, the more I think about it. I also really like how this chapter emphasized the idea that however much Harald clashed with the government, there were still those who respected him among the top brass in the Navy. It's just that he didn't really mean much. It's just that he didn't really just that didn't really mean much, because ultimately the ones who do have the power to make that decision are those at the higher levels of the government, i.e. the five elders and Emu. And yeah, in saying that, let's talk about the ending where we see the five elders basically dishing out the final ultimatum to Harald. If he succeeds in killing Rox, then they'll offer Elbath a place at the table in the coalition of nations of the world government. And I feel like we are getting closer now to that point of discovering what the true reason was behind Harald's death, because as far as we know, Harald definitely did not take place at the incident in God Valley where Rox actually met his end. But those two incidents are feeling more and more interconnected now that we know what happened than they did before. And feel it all starts I feel it's all going to start with the moment Harald meets Shanks, because we still haven't seen how that meeting as of yet, and just what that meeting between those two looked like. But because of how things are playing out in this chapter, it's definitely looking more and more like the second meeting on Elbath, and Shanks's warning is basically in Shanks's warning to Harald is all about the threat to his is all about the government's plan to annex Elbath. It's one of those things that would make sense given current circumstances in the present. But I think this ultimatum was just I think the ultimatum in itself was just the government's way of attempting a more, shall we say, peaceful transition rather than going the route of basically completely overtaking, of basically completely invading Elbath in itself. And just it's I think whatever Shanks is however the meeting with Shanks goes, the ultimate core of it is going to be, the thing he wants to is for him to take precautions against the government. And with that said, though, let's get one of the more interesting reveals of this chapter out of the way, which is that we get the origin of Shaki's ripoff bar and how it originally started on Hachinosu. And yeah, you can see how this is another area where you can see all the pieces are starting to kind of fall into place, how everything on God Valley even happened, or to be more precise, how Garp convinced Roger kind of to team up with him, and how Rox himself, why and how Rox himself probably invaded God Valley as well, because I think in some way Shockey ended up being held captive on God Valley, or at least that's what the narration seems to be implying, and it was at least in part what drew Rox and Roger to come to blows in the unlikely team up between Roger and Garp. For the pirates, it was all like for the pirates involved. I think the whole God Valley incident begins with the fight over a woman, in this case Shockey, and yet ironically, the one who ends up scoring the victory in the end was Rayleigh. And yes, I know there was a lot more to that whole conflict considering the scope of the event and just all the characters and events set in motion. But yet, I think yet it is kind of funny to think about that if things did go the way I think they did from Rox and Roger's perspective, then when you get down to it, the only thing those two cared about during that entire battle was Shockey. Everything else was just sort of bleed over. And I think that was I think the more I'm thinking about it, I think that was very much the intent. I think the government used Shockey as a means to draw Rox out into the open. I'm more than convinced that's basically what this chapter was alluding to when they talked about how a treasure can be easily stolen. I'm willing to bet money on that. It's just I don't know if that's entirely the case. And yet no matter the reason everyone had for being there, God Valley was intentionally or not, it was truly a big moment in history that created so many smaller but consequential moments that really crafted the world as we know it today. And because of that, I think the one thing that is truly being set up with so much focus being put on God Valley is that God Valley, much like it was in the past, is going to be the final stage of the battle for the Pirate King and the world's, and another big change in the world's history. In this case, the history of the Void Century basically coming to light. I think all these things are all going to be taking place on God Valley as well, but in this case, rather than it being Rox, it's going to be his son. It's going to be his son, Teach, who ends up being the one in order to put all these things in motion. I think at the end of the day, it's all going to be happening there. And yeah, outside of that, not much else to talk about with this chapter. It was also kind of nice though to see so many other little moments in this. In the little character moments in this chapter, like for example, we kind of get to see kind of the origins of, I guess, of basically of the whole Roger and sort of and of the whole not Roger, of the whole Whitebeard and Emperor Stussy dynamic. Yeah, you can. It's one of those things where it kind of confirms that, yeah, Stussy's whole love for Whitebeard, it's basically all in her head. She's kind of delusionally in love with him, but she's kind of delusionally in love with him in a way, and yeah, it's you can see how that kind of a lot of love these pirates have is all a delusion in their head kind of thing. But yeah, guys, that's all I got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, follow me on Blue Sky, and on this Crunchyroll, bitchin' for Kishbell, hit the subscribe button, and just shit around, guys. Dark Knight Illinois, signing off. Later, everyone.